Welcome to Vision India Amrit Kal series. Kush Verma ji, 79 batch IS officer from the UP Kader. UP has had a history of producing one of the topmost bureaucratic leaders of the country. Maximum number definitely for sure. And those leaders also includes Mr. Kush Verma, a family of celebrated IS officers. His brother, his sister-in-law, they are all IS officers who served the nation for almost 4 decades. Mr. Verma today has joined us to discuss about the role of a very key institution, National Center for Good Governance, earlier known as Verma ji, could you please tell us what was it known as?
It was known as the National Institute for Administrative Research.
He was also the Director General of that institution. And then in 2017-18, right?
No, in 2016, I took over as the DG of National Center of Good Governance.
And you were there for a year.
And I was in that institution for a total of 4 years.
Okay, he has been there for 4 years, that I remembered. But most importantly, the subject is good governance. 25th of December is celebrated in this nation as the Good Governance Day. The day also marked as the birthday of the former great Prime Minister, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. It is also an opportunity for us to wish Christmas belatedly to all the viewers and to Mr. Verma and his family. Now, good governance is an issue which, not only encompasses the governance of the bureaucracy and the politicians and the economic setup of the country, it encompasses all institutions. Corporate governance, there is a lot of talk about it. We have rules, regulations, SEBI, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, they regulate all the corporate governance issues. With respect to good governance from a policy perspective, from a national perspective, NCGC plays a very crucial role. And as far as my knowledge goes, this is something which will drive the nation's growth story, because if corruption, if governance failures are not tackled, no story of growth can be. Well, I think there was some internet problem, technical problem. This keeps happening. Some technical problem, Mr. Verma. So we start again.
Yes. Okay.
NCGC, National Center for Corporate Governance, former Director General, Shri Kush Verma, IS officer, 1979 batch, UP cadre with us. He'll take us through the relevance, the nucleus of good governance with respect to running a nation. Without wasting further ado and without any further time being wasted, let me hand it over to Shri Kush Verma ji. Thank you so much for joining in the Amrit Kal series. 25th December just passed by. Now we will be talking about good governance from an institutional perspective, your personal experiences, and there are so many issues which the opposition keeps talking about from a failure in the governance perspective, which we will also interject upon as we go along. Over to you, Shri Kush Verma.
Thank you, Amit ji, for your kind introduction.
Verma ji, it is on mute. It's on mute.
No, I've settled it. I was the Director General of the National Center for Good Governance, the National Institute of Administrative Research in its earlier avatar. It was a sister institution of the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Missouri. And the mandate was to undertake research on public policy issues and to disseminate the same to various public servants, not only of India, but also those from abroad. So initially, a lot of work was done on good governance with respect to education, health, and so on. And also a training program was was created, in which the public servants from PSUs and the state governments were invited, and they were administered these modules. And the best brains of the country were invited as guest speakers, so that people could get a first-hand idea of what good governance is all about, especially the principles of transparency, accountability, efficient public service delivery, and so on. Now, I would like to recount how this particular institution became the National Center for Good Governance, which was actually one of the institutions. The DOPT was looking at a number of agencies, including IIMs, and giving this mandate. But it was the National Institute of Administrative Research which was honored and privileged to get this particular mandate. And once the mandate was given, we also got civil servants from various countries across the globe. In fact, currently, National Center for Good Governance is in the process of training public servants from across 34 countries. So you can imagine the reach of this institute. Over to you, Amit Ji.
Kushji, we would like to know more about the institution first. I'll just make it a little more, kind of a chronological for you. First, about the institution, the genesis of the institution, how it was conceptualized, and when it was started. And then you've already told us about the mandate, the vision, the mission policies, and all that. But also, I mean, how do you select people to be brought into training for these institutions? Or are they automatic? It's just an automatic route for the LBSNAA students or the future bureaucrats to simply be a part of this NCGC. There is a selection process. What is the duration of training? What are the different kinds of trainings that you guys impart? And how it impacts, most important part of the segment would be how it impacts the nation, with a few stories, with a few case studies, probably something wherein you can align the training and the knowledge that is imparted to the students of NCGC and how it was probably inculcated into the practice. And that is how the nation benefited from NCGC's delivery. That is what we would also like to know.
Thank you, Amit. Those are very relevant questions. Now, to put it in its historical perspective, in the 1980s, in the academy and early 1990s, a number of centers were set up. For instance, centers dealing with gender, centers dealing with rural development, and centers dealing with various aspects of governance. So, in that context, in the early 1990s, the National Institute of Administrative Research was set up. And initially, the idea was focused solely on research, and a number of research studies were done by this institute. But then later on, in about 2010 on 2000 on early 2000 onwards, it was felt that the academy was focusing on IAS officers, and the rest of the country, there were so many other areas of public governance, and public servants were being neglected in terms of training. So then the reach of NIAR was expanded, National Institute of Administration, and public servants from Odisha, from Madhya Pradesh, and from other states, they were given training. And as I said, the focus was entirely on matters of good governance, with particular emphasis on accountability and transparency, because RTI Act had just come in 2005. So they were given a very rigorous exposure to all these matters. And then once again, once that particular phase was completed, the next phase was taking up public servants from the PSUs and from other agencies which required this training. So actually what happened was that by word of mouth and also by publicity from the side of NIAR, that these are the training courses which are being offered. Typically the training courses were of 2 weeks, and the first week was in Missouri, and it was offered to foreign public servants. So the first 1 week is spent in Missouri, and there the entire exposure is about the Indian governance system as well as concepts of good governance. And as I said, we had guest speakers from all over India. They were the experts in their particular areas. And for instance, we had Mrs. Shalini Rajneesh, who had set up the Sakala system in Karnataka, which is one of the best examples of social accountability that you can
She
think of.
she was recently, or I think she is currently the chief secretary there.
Yes, the in Karnataka. That's right. She's in fact the lead mover in this experiment of Sakala, in which time-bound public service delivery was mandated by law. So this was public service delivery legislation which went beyond the concept of citizens' charters, and people who time had to give penalties out of their own pocket. So that was something which was unique and which led to a great deal of improvement in the public service delivery system. So beyond that, as I said, 1 week in Missouri, and then 1 week in Delhi, in which there was practical interaction with a lot of different agencies. For instance, they would be taken to Delhi Metro, and there they would interact with the managing director, and there they would be given a short introduction to the Indian Metro, how it came about, and why it is a success story, not merely from the technical viewpoint but from the governance viewpoint.
I
So
remember,
all these
just a
things.
small interjection, sir. I remember Sheila Dikshit, during her tenure as a chief minister, she was very categorical to all her employees, to all her public sector employees, the government and state government employees, that if they have to achieve a standard of delivery, professionalism, they have to look towards and look forward to the DMRC, the Delhi Metro Rail Corporation, and the standards it has set up. And that time, Sridharanji was leading the show. This is somewhere around 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7 that I'm talking about. That is the time when this particular, instruction was laid out by the chief minister's office. So I think you guys hit the right buttons. NCGC hit the right buttons.
Yes, and we received not only from the public servants but from the various state governments, and then later on from the government of Bangladesh and others. They said that the exposure to these new systems of governance, and particularly citizen centric models of governance, we laid a great deal of emphasis on how citizen centric models are gaining currency all over the world. So, from mapping citizens' expectations to mapping citizens' journeys across the public service delivery system, and mapping the pain points and how to get rid of them. So, all these things they could take back with them, and we had encouraged them to introduce these in their own areas of governance.
I remember there is also this good governance week celebrated, wherein Ambedkar ji, there is a Ambedkar ji is I don't remember exactly. It is a week wherein the IS officers is newly inducted, especially the ones, they're all trained in Delhi. Could you tell us a little more about that? And is NCGC a part of that kind of delivery?
Um, Not exactly, but what does happen is that there is constant interaction with the probationers, the IAS officer trainees who are there in the academy. There is a lot of influence which the National Center for Good Governance wields on the probationers, because the officer trainees. They used to be called probationers in our time, but now they are called officer trainees. So they also come and they interact with the faculty. The faculty members of LBS NNA come and interact with the members of NCGG. So there is a very healthy exchange of ideas and exposure to these systems of good governance.
Could you tell us a little more about how much emphasis do you people give to the issues of corruption? Because RTI came in 2005, we had the Lokpal introduced, Anna Saab's revolution, Anna Saab, Hazare ji, Anna Saab Hazare ji, Dada Saab Hazare ji had done 40 years of labor behind this. And then after RTI and Lokpal, the country doesn't seem to have taken off in terms of effective utilization of these two important, legislations? And how do your trainees, align and gel with these two new legislations, which are very critical for citizenship, for citizens' comfort and citizens, centric approach? How do you think your trainees can really improve and work upon that?
I think what you have done, talked about just now, Amitji, is really the single most biggest pain point for Indian citizens, not only for Indian citizens, but I would imagine citizens across the globe who have to interact with the bureaucracy. So, huge emphasis in NCGG courses. In fact, the very first lecture which is taken is normally on ethics in administration. And they are exposed to different systems across the world, particularly in Singapore and Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong, for instance, in 1960s was a basket case for corruption, and now it ranks among the top 10 of the cleanest countries in the world. How did this happen? It happened because of the establishment in 1973 Commission Against Corruption, ICAC. And this particular commission was given full powers and funded, given full autonomy. They could go after anybody from the president to the peon and so on. So different models are showcased. And if the question which is asked, if Hong Kong could do it, why can't India do it? Right? So, of course, Hong Kong is a minuscule country compared to India, but the principles are the same. If there is political will, if there is administrative acumen, funding, if it keeps pace with technological changes, then there's no reason why India should also not come in the first 10 cleanest countries of the world.
That draws me.
Somehow, Amitji, I think what happens, this is a matter of personal perception. We get the institutions right, but they are there more in style than in substance.
That draws me and leads me to my next question. Next, observation, not a question, because this is not a question and answer show. Neither is this an interview. This is an interaction and an opportunity to learn from people like you and disseminate the learning to the points of absorption which matter for this kind of topics. Now, bureaucracy. Do you also involve, as you said, state employees? So there are almost 13 lakh employees in the public sector today. CPSCs, especially the CPSCs, there are 13 lakh employees, out of which 8.5 lakh are regular employees and 4.5 lakhs are contractual employees. Now, if we talk about this huge number of people manning the public sector, the silver medal of the country, which is very critical, with almost 250 public sector companies in the center. And also there are so many public sector at the state level. A lot of them, perform very well, and a lot of them do not perform. Now, out of these, only 61, 70 of them are listed public sector companies. So do you focus on the listed public sector companies as employees, or do you look after training or take people and batches from all kinds of public sector companies? Because corruption in the public sector is also very, very important, not only from the bureaucratic, but also from the corporate perspective, because they have corporate governance rules. But do you also double up by training them on the through the NCGC platform?
As I said, Amitji, when I was there as DG NCGG, then we did do this. I'm now told that the focus has shifted completely to training of public servants from abroad. But when I was there, then definitely we had trainee officers from across public sector units across the country, and public sector management into practices of good governance, which would be on the basis of principles, which would stretch to the corporate sector as well. So it was a question also of giving them some inputs about corporate governance, which would resonate with them, depending upon, of course, on the seniority, and also give them some generic principles of how governance ought to be conducted in a public sector milieu. So definitely this was taken care of, and on that basis we would look like, and on that basis we would get the trainees from them.
Yeah, that is, another observation is, do you have, different pedagogy for people at different levels? Because an entrant vis-a-vis somebody at a joint secretary level would be definitely be dealt differently in your institution.
Definitely this was taken care of when we were designing the course content itself. We got most of our trainees at the mid sector level. So most of our training programs were designed at that level. Great care was taken, in fact, to design a module which would contain not only elements from India but also from abroad, and also for people, for instance, for public servants from Bangladesh, for instance. We would give them a slice of life of India, also the cultural life, very important. The give them a feel of what Indian civilization stands for. So they would go back with an idea not only of the governance scenario, but also how rich our culture is, how rich our civilization is, what are the kind of messages which are being sent across by India to the world, and so on.
Is it open to the private sector?
No, it is not open to the private sector.
Currently, the focus is on uh, trainees from abroad. That is what you're telling me.
Yes, that's right. So there have been trainees from Cambodia, there have been trainees from Myanmar, there have been trainees from and I must say that they are extremely gratified at the end. The kind of feedback they have given is that these trainees are not at a stage of governance that India is. So, being exposed to the various principles of good governance which India embodies is a matter of great learning for them.
See, extreme, the relevance and the performance of policyholders or the nation builders cannot work because the relationship between the bureaucracy and the politicians is completely inextricable. Now, in that situation, does your institution, even if it imparts the best possible governance principles to your trainees, is it really effective if the politicians are also not trained in the same vein? Because if there is a disconnect between the understanding, then ultimately the legislators who will decide, and the bureaucracy obviously has to follow orders. How do you think they can effectively work towards what they have been trained in your institution?
So, Amitji, you're absolutely right. There is a very close connection between the politician and the bureaucrat. From my understanding is that from time to time, even the academy has taken up this idea and given a number of proposals to the central government, saying that they would like to train the MPs and the MLAs, so that there would be some kind of synchronicity between bureaucracy and the politicians. Um, but none of them somehow have borne fruit because there is a lot of resistance to the idea of training somebody who has been elected. I think that particular idea has yet to come to fruition in India. But as you said, it's highly important, and I believe that the quality of governance would substantially go up if that idea is implemented.
After somebody gets into the IAS or the IPS, IRS, and all that, you know, in the case of private companies, corporate governance norms are regulated by institutions. In the case of bureaucracy, does NCGC or any other institution play a role in the reporting and the kind of regulation of governance of the bureaucracy or the governance of the nation? is there any reporting format or is there any reporting mandate for good governance?
No, in fact, NCGG is completely divorced from that particular aspect. That is something which the UPSC and other agencies are involved in. The function of NCGG is to impart training in such a way that the civil servants get a flavor of what is expected of them, not only in the field but also in the area of policy making. So they are given those kind of inputs. Unfortunately, so far there's no mechanism which has been evolved for NCGG to do this kind of work.
To my knowledge, the last administrative reforms committee was the second one, and post that there has been no movement with respect to formation of another administrative reforms committee. Now, does NCGC inculcate the recommendations of the second administrative reforms committee, which was quite heavy from the human resource management perspective as well?
This, in fact, these administrative reforms communist reports, the real tragedy is that the follow up is very weak. So while NCGG did incorporate the principles of the second administrative reforms commission in its modules, to the extent that they have been actually conceptualized, that part has been taken care of, but getting them on the ground has been a challenge.
There is a lot of talk about the lateral entrance in the bureaucracy. How do you tackle that, and how do you suggest, because you're a former DG of this institution, a bureaucrat with immense experience and unblemished track record, to my knowledge. So how do you suggest, sir, to improve the efficacy of this new model that is being envisioned, called the lateral entry, to ensure that technically more equipped people enter the administrative reforms and the bureaucracy, but they also need to be aligned to the governance issues and the governance mechanisms? Does NCGC have something in mind for that?
Uh, the point you have raised is extremely important, because one of the very frequent the lateral entry system is that the principals of and take it up with the Ministry of currently, of course, DARPG handles that's the administrative reforms and pensions and grievances, public grievances. That is the ministry which handles NCGG. So I'm quite sure that this will be taken in the right spirit.
Okay. Like Sakal, can you hear me? Because there's a technical issue, I guess.
No, I can hear you.
Like Sakal, could you cite a couple of more examples? Because this Sakal initiative of Shalini Rajneesh in Karnataka, these kind of examples, are very important. And there are also cases of, you know, crowdfunding, which I have heard and learned. Very few cases are there wherein people at even a DM level, SDO level, they have resorted to crowdfunding to even build roads in their areas. You know, public pooling of funds. Are these kind of innovative?
Mhm.
Are these kind of innovative techniques also taught to your wards so that they can set an example?
Well, you see, NCGG was also involved in assessing the various candidates for the PM's award delivery. And in that context, a number of case studies came to light, and which were then incorporated in the curriculum. So to that extent, of course, crowdfunding at when I left the service, that was in 2016, it was not on the horizon, but innovative approaches. So there was a lot of focus, a lot of emphasis on these innovative approaches to public service delivery, and they were given in the form of case studies, so that the officer trainees could also incorporate them in their respective areas.
There are cases of extreme, kind of sacrifice also, which are documented in the case of natural disasters, which bureaucrats from the IAS and the IPS, IRS are credited for. Recent cases are in Tamil Nadu. So, do you also prepare and train your students for handling such unprecedented situations?
They are given some kind of an exposure, but in fact there was another center for disaster management which was active at the time when I was there in the academy, and that was more the focal point where they were given disaster management and different kind of approaches, as well as the legal framework on how to deal with it.
That was part of the NCGC,
No, that was a separate center in the academy at that time.
means the Masuri Academy.
Yes, that's right, the Lal Bahadur Shastri National
Okay.
Academy.
Okay. How different is your NCGC from IIPA?
I think that there's not really too much of difference in the mandate and in the approach. Both of them are concerned with the issues of good governance. A is a little more focused on the India-centric kind of issues, whereas NCGG now has taken a broad-based global outlook.
From a case study perspective, wherein you people recommended cases for even the PM awards, couple of cases that come to your mind off the hook.
We had one in which there was a complaint redressal grievance system which was set up in UP, and this was activated by way of SMSs. It had a system in which the common citizen could put in a complaint and track the results and so on. So that was a very innovative approach by which the every could engage with the bureaucracy and file his complaint system and track it to the end. So that was the kind of case study which was being administered to the officer trainees.
You see, finally, couple of last couple of minutes. I mean, just how do you balance populism versus governance? Because the terrain is so plural, it is so heterogeneous for a public servant, especially when they deal with areas with which they do not hold domicile kind of alignment to. Even in that situation, how do you think such situations can be tackled, wherein a balance has to be struck between populism? I mean, there are stretches of Naxal affected areas. We have very poor areas. We have, areas which are prone to natural.
Excuse me.
Please take your time, sir.
Thank you.
Are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine.
There are areas which are prone to natural disasters. Now, in those situations, these are all heterogeneous situations and very challenging situations all unto themselves. Yes, we came up with that disaster thing because of the tsunami thing also just a couple of days back. In fact, it was just yesterday when we had the tsunami which rocked the world. And could you also share a couple of examples or one example of how bureaucracy, especially southern region, helped tackle a tsunami in the year 2005 when it happened?
I'm afraid I don't have direct access to case studies in that area. But the point you have raised about populism and how bureaucrats have to navigate that particular position. Now, you see, populism is something which politicians across the spectrum are, they find it an easy way to offer freebies but it is the function of the bureaucrat to point out the pitfalls in this process, to point out how it can damage the financial fabric of the state. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, it is not for the bureaucrat to take the decision. They can only offer good advice. And in fact, if you recall, it was Sardar Patel who said that I would encourage my secretaries to speak out the truth, because that is what they are inducted for. They are not there to be yes men. They are there to fearlessly speak their mind and to guide everybody in the right fashion.
There were instances over the last 75, 80 years, India has had many, many unfortunate incidents of young IS officers being lynched as well. Right from the days of the wild Bihar to the jungles of Tamil Nadu, Virappan, led Tamil Nadu atrocities. I mean, the bureaucracy has to face all those kind of situations. Um, I'm not talking about IS officers only, even the IPS, IRS officers face the flag for raising the flag or whistleblowing, especially when we have so much of influence setting nowadays, which has become so prominent, especially from the celebrity perspective. There were recently some cases, even a film star's son was accused, and then the IRS officer till date in Mumbai is facing the flag for it. I mean, just because he pointed out and he caught him red-handed. Now, those issues, from a governance training perspective, before we end the show, what would be your suggestions to the generations now who are donning the bureaucratic cap to ensure that they hold the flag flying high, despite all the challenges, the type of which I just now pointed out to you, sir? What are your suggestions and your recommendations?
So, Amitji, you are right. It's a very challenging environment in which the current lot of civil servants work in. Now, my advice to all of them, because when I was in the academy, I was also the advisor to the UP cadre officers, and they would come to me and ask that what is the best way forward. So, I would just tell them one thing, that you are the master of your own conscience. Never compromise on your conscience. And if you can get a good night's sleep at the end of the day, that is what you should aim for. Never compromise, no matter what the inducement, no matter what the threat, no matter what the as long as you can look everybody in the face and say that I did the right thing at the end of the day, I did not compromise, I stood by my principles, I did what was right, then you have earned the right to being called a good civil servant.
Easier said than done and very subjective. But any which ways, we would like to close the show with the last question or the last observation. Do you also announce or do you plan or do you suggest, because you are no more in the seat now, you are a retired officer, do you suggest having awards from the NCGC also, like the corporate governance awards are announced by everybody here and there?
Yes, that would, but I would imagine that PM's awards are there, so there might be a conflict of jurisdiction there. And since the PM's awards are accepted as the benchmark for good governance, I don't think there is a need for a separate
Varmaji, can you hear me? Last, I mean, any points that you would like to throw on the collaborations that your institution has entered into? Can you hear me? Any areas of collaboration that your institution has entered into from a private or from a government perspective?
MOUs across the globe with a number of very prestigious institutes in India and abroad. So the collaborations were there, but the administrative training institutes and state governments, they were also involved. Then the Center for was also a collaborator.
I strongly feel that there should be more cohesive approach between the public-private also in this particular case, because the corporate governance system nowadays is no more bereft of the national governance issues. Because, for example, if you take the case of banking uh, and the case of ED, I mean, they're inextricably linked nowadays. Every second day, you come up with a case wherein you find something or the other at a major bank or a major financial institution. Even major institutions are all under the bureaucratic net, if I may say so. So I feel that there has to be more, kind of interaction, and then people are trading bombs at each other with respect to political nexus, etc., etc., and kind of having some kind of a nepotism around all these particular issues for which they are vindicated for. So I'm sure a more cohesive approach from a public-private perspective would be something which will hold us all in good stead. Because if these two institutions function, these two wings fly separately, we will never reach the sky. Thank you so much, Mr. Verma.